If you dare to step into this mystery, hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling unsolved horror mysteries. Each victim vanished. Each scene left untouched. No signs of entry. No cries for help. No blood. But in every room, taped to the wall, suspended by a rusted nail, one thing remained: a single red thread. Same length, same angle, always pointing in a direction that didn't exist. Investigators tore down walls, measured distances, traced every line, and still they found nothing until Miss Maple arrived. She didn't ask where the victims had gone. She asked what they had seen before they vanished. The answer was never recorded. It was never written, because those who see it leave something behind, a thread, and the truth, you're not ready for it. Case number 1, the missing room. At exactly 4:13 a.m., the Henderson home security system reset itself. No power outage, no interference. Every light dimmed simultaneously, and when the system came back online, the back door, one that had never opened, was unlocked. The family of 4 inside never left a single trace behind. Dishes untouched, beds made, phones charging. But in the far corner of the house was a door. It hadn't been there before. It wasn't listed on the blueprints. And behind it, a sealed room, one that had no reason to exist. The Hendersons had lived in the same house for years, a modest, single-story home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. They were a close-knit family. 2 parents, 2 children, no history of trouble, no debt, no enemies. The kind of family whose absence is noticed immediately. And when a neighbor reported not seeing their car leave for 2 days, police were dispatched. The door was locked, nothing out of place, until they walked the hallway. Something was off. The corridor stretched too long. A window in the wrong place. One room too many for the house's square footage. And then they found the outline, an architectural scar along the plaster, where a hidden door had been sealed from the inside. Behind that wall, hidden for no one to find, was a 10 by 10 room. No windows, no light fixtures, no signs of ventilation. Just a lone wooden chair facing a blank wall. It sat perfectly centered, as if placed there for a reason. And that was it. No markings, no signs of a struggle, no blood. But the room was unnaturally cold. Forensics tested the air. It was denser than the surrounding house. Not just in temperature, but pressure, a draft that couldn't be traced. The dust patterns showed that the chair had been moved recently, though no one could have entered. Behind the wall, investigators discovered hair. Human, short, brown, and embedded in the drywall itself. A child's molar, a baby tooth. Just above it, scratched faintly into the wall, a phrase, "We're not the first." And on the back of the chair, a single red thread, pinned with an antique nail, hanging straight down. It didn't touch the floor. Miss Maple, consulting with local authorities, reviewed the case and requested access to national databases. What she found disturbed even seasoned investigators. This wasn't the first instance, nor the second. In fact, over the last 20 years, there have been more than 12 similar disappearances, all following the same pattern. A sudden electrical failure or system reset around 3 to 4 a.m. A previously unknown room appears or is discovered. A family or individual vanishes without explanation. A red thread. The phrase, "always the same, always etched or hidden." We're not the first. The locations were spread out across states, even across countries, different cultures, different languages. But the room was always the same size, always the same shape, always with the chair. She uncovered old black and white crime scene photographs from a 1972 house fire in Oregon. The property was destroyed, but one photo survived. In the charred remains, the same layout. A clean square among ash. No soot, just the outline of a chair. Maple began digging through architectural records. In 3 of the homes, the sealed room didn't appear in any blueprint, but records of a remodel, hastily filed and abruptly canceled, hinted that someone had discovered the room before and tried to erase it. She theorized the room isn't built. It's not designed. It emerges under certain conditions. A trauma, a disturbance, or maybe attention. When someone becomes aware of it, it anchors itself to their reality. In every case, those who discovered the room began showing signs of paranoia, disrupted sleep, night terrors, auditory hallucinations, and then silence. No final messages, no struggle. And in every case, the door was closed from the inside. Maple returned to Henderson's site after the fire. The property was demolished, but the floor plan left a void. A 10 by 10 gap in the concrete slab. The builders who cleared the debris reported something they didn't log. Tools lost when brought near the space would disappear. No echoes, no sound. And once, for exactly 3 seconds, a radio nearby picked up a voice whispering, "Don't let them map it." The voice was traced to no frequency. It hasn't happened again. But now, the phrase appears more often, found behind mirrors, beneath floorboards, inside walls that were supposedly solid, and always written in the same hand. If your home had a hidden room, would you open it? Would you sit in the chair? What if the blueprints of your home weren't drawn wrong, but changed after you moved in? Comment your answer below, and check the corner of the hallway you never walk down at night. Some rooms don't ask permission to exist. They're just waiting for someone to notice them. Case number 2, the playground murders. Between 1974 and 2016, 13 children disappeared within 1 square mile of Wren Hill Park. All were last seen within 100 feet of the same rotted merry-go-round. No ransom notes, no signs of struggle, no remains. And yet every search concluded at the exact same place, an overgrown sandbox. When local police reviewed decades of old playground footage, one thing became clear. In every case, the child looked back, not toward the parents, not toward the street, but toward the swing set, toward something no one else could see. The town of Wren Hill is small, quiet, a place with more stories than stoplights. It's nestled in a wooded region of upstate New York, known for its winters and its old, rust-covered parks, especially Wren Hill Playground. Once the town's most popular weekend spot, it was closed in the late 80s after a string of disappearances began drawing attention. Still, local kids returned, as kids do. Dares were made, names scratched into wood, but the pattern never stopped. Every 12 years, like clockwork, a child would vanish. Daylight, no noise, just gone. The only connection? They had all been seen, at some point in the week leading up, lingering near the sandbox, some even talking to it, as if someone were inside. In 1996, a man named Gary Holst was arrested, a drifter. His fingerprints were found on a swing chain during the investigation of one of the disappearances. The town breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, someone to blame, but the DNA never matched. Holst had no history, no motive. He was released. 2 months later, another child vanished. The swing was moving again. Miss Maple arrived in Wren Hill in 2017, following a tip from a former town archivist. He claimed the playground had been built atop an older foundation, part of a boarding school that had burned down in the 1930s. There were no detailed records, just whispers, rumors that children heard voices through the floorboards, and that a young girl was locked beneath the school by the staff after claiming to speak to the roots. Maple located archival footage from a community day in 1981, years before the first official disappearance. It was standard Super 8 film. But frame by frame, she noticed something chilling. Multiple children could be seen looking toward the same corner of the playground. Not at each other, not the camera, but at the sandbox. Their expressions were distant, calm, and in one 3-second clip, a child's mouth moves as if speaking. There's no audio, but lip readers concluded the words were, "She's waiting under it." That line appears in at least 3 unrelated diary entries from the families of victims across different decades. In each instance, the child had nightmares involving a voice from underground, a voice asking them to play. One child drew a picture of a girl beneath the earth, holding strings attached to the swings. Maple returned to the now abandoned site with ground-penetrating radar. Beneath the sandbox, The soil patterns were off, anomalies that suggested hollow space. She dug. Less than 2 feet down, her shovel hit wood. A hatch. She unearthed it slowly. The wood was old, water-damaged, but intact. When opened, it revealed a narrow staircase, spiraling down, wooden hand-carved, and far older than the playground above. She descended. The air grew colder. The walls damp. She passed old support beams and carvings, etched names. Dozens. Hundreds. Many matched those of the missing children. Some were names never reported. One beam read, "Do not speak to her." Deeper down, she found a single room, round, no furniture, just drawings, scrawled in charcoal, childlike, stick figures holding hands, smiling, and one figure alone larger, with long hair and arms that stretched the floor. Above it, a phrase written in jagged handwriting. She likes when they stay. In the center of the room, an old stuffed rabbit, molded, water-stained. The swing above creaked, and then a sound, not from her recorder, but echoing through the tunnel. Laughter. One child. Then more. Then silence. Miss Maple sealed the hatch behind her. Authorities were notified. The staircase was deemed structurally unsound. The site was officially condemned. But 1 week later, a group of teens entered the park to film a YouTube challenge. They went missing. All 3 phones were recovered. Only one video remained. The footage showed the group laughing, joking, approaching the sandbox. Then movement, not from the group, but from the sand itself. A hand, small, pale, reaching upward, grasping. The camera drops. Darkness. Then a single sentence spoken by a soft, distant voice. She said, "I can stay if I bring more." When the video was paused and lightened, a face could be seen at the edge of the frame. A girl, no older than 10. But local records and facial recognition returned no match. The girl did not resemble any of the missing. She hadn't vanished. She had always been there. Would you go down the stairs if you found them? What if someone asked you to play and no one else could see them? What if every abandoned playground hides more than broken swings and rusted chains? Comment below, and think twice before walking near an old swing set. Some playgrounds don't forget the names they learn, and some games never end. Case number 3, the mirror incident. The girl in the video looks normal until she turns toward the mirror. That's when the footage breaks. Her reflection doesn't follow. It just stands there, blinking and smiling. 1 week later, her family reports her missing, but the door was locked, her clothes untouched, her phone left behind, still recording. What happened next was caught on surveillance. And what it shows, no one has ever been able to explain. Briar Valley is a small town in North Dakota. Quiet, remote, a place where neighbors know each other's dogs by name. Nothing big ever happens there. Until October 14th, 2022. A high school junior named Eliza Quinn doesn't show up for class. Teachers assume she's sick. Friends say she was acting strange the day before, asking odd questions like, "Do you ever feel like you're watching yourself from behind your eyes?" Her parents, both teachers at a nearby college, check her room. Nothing is missing. Her bed is made. On her dresser, her phone is still recording. Camera facing a full-length mirror. The footage shows Eliza standing silently, looking into the glass. She doesn't speak. She barely blinks. But at the 18-minute mark, her reflection lifts its hand. Eliza doesn't move. The reflection does. Detectives retrieved over 27 hours of footage from Eliza's phone and laptop. Most of it was quiet. Empty frames of her room, her reading, brushing her hair, talking to no one. But in several of the clips, something changes. Her movements and her reflection begin to fall out of sync. In one video, Eliza puts her hand to her chest. Her reflection moves half a second later. In another, she tilts her head left. Her reflection tilts right. Experts reviewed the footage. No glitches. No digital artifacts. No signs of manipulation. The mirror? Normal. Until they viewed the surveillance video from a hallway outside her room. On the night she vanished, the hallway camera captured her door opening at 2:13 a.m. Eliza walks out slowly, barefoot, her eyes fixed ahead. 2 seconds later, another Eliza follows. Identical. Same pajamas. Same walking pace. But the second version doesn't blink, doesn't breathe, and then both disappear around the corner. No one ever saw Eliza Quinn again. Miss Maple was called in after local authorities failed to uncover leads. Her first stop? Eliza's room. She requested no one touch the mirror. With infrared scanning, she examined the glass. What the scan revealed was disturbing. Behind the first layer of reflective coating was another image, a faint handprint on the inside. Not Eliza's. Too small, too narrow. The mirror was removed, and behind it, nothing, just drywall. No crawl space, no wiring. But Maple noticed something stranger. Eliza's journals, usually filled with school notes and poetry, had changed in the weeks before her disappearance. The final entry was just 5 lines. She looks like me. She knows when I'm lying. She waits until I'm asleep. She copies my laugh wrong. She said I can rest now. That same day, her browser history showed hundreds of searches for terms like mirror people, Doppler consciousness. Can your reflection trap you? Why does my mirror delay? Do mirrors watch back? Maple sent the mirror to a private lab. 2 weeks later, she received the analysis. The silver nitrate layer was embedded with microscopic etchings, almost like fingerprints, but overlapping hundreds of times. And the silver? Contaminated with trace levels of human DNA. DNA that didn't match Eliza or anyone else in the national database. Maple brought in the Quinns for one final interview. She asked them one question. Are you absolutely sure the girl you saw leave her room was your daughter? After a long pause, Eliza's mother whispered. She smiled, but not like Eliza. It looked like someone pretending to smile. Weeks passed, then months, then a year. The case was declared inactive. The Quinns moved. The house was sold. But Miss Maple didn't stop. She discovered a pattern across 3 states. Cases involving teenagers who recorded their mirrors, then disappeared. One in Montana, one in Maine, one in Arizona. Each case had the same signs. Delayed reflections, disconnected behavior. A final video showing a mirror and a smile. But in Eliza's case, there was one more clue. 3 months after her disappearance, her best friend Ashley received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid of Eliza standing in front of a mirror. The reflection had no face, just blank skin where eyes and mouth should have been. Police dismissed it as a hoax. Maple didn't. Would you trust a person in your reflection if they blinked before you did? What if you raised your hand and your reflection was already waiting? What if the thing in the mirror didn't want to copy you anymore? What if it wanted to replace you? Comment below. What would you do if your reflection moved first? Case number for the code of Echo Pines. The first house had the numbers carved into floorboards, 327.44.02. The second house, 327.45.03. The third, same prefix, different ending. And in every one of those houses, the family was gone. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just radios left on, playing nothing but static. But when you tuned them just slightly, you heard something else, a voice repeating the same thing. Time's almost up. Echo Pines was never meant to exist on any official map. A project town built in the late 60s by a private defense contractor. It was abandoned before its final inspection. 26 homes. No schools. No post office. Just rows of identical houses, meant for test families participating in a classified behavioral study. That's the official explanation. What wasn't disclosed was what happened after the site was closed. Over the next 20 years, amateur explorers, historians, and urban photographers who entered the town reported the same thing. Numbers, written on walls, inside bathtubs, beneath bed frames, always in dried reddish-brown streaks, always structured in sets of 9. And if you tuned the home radios, somehow still powered, They each emitted a frequency that made your ears ring and your vision shimmer at the edges. Miss Maple received a tip about the codes after a student filmmaker uploaded grainy footage from a drone flight over Echo Pines. In the clip, barely visible from above, were hundreds of painted symbols connecting the rooftops. Dots, bars, circles. Morse code. The filmmaker vanished 2 days later. His drone was found impaled in a tree. Its memory card was intact. Maple's first visit to Echo Pines was during an overcast spring morning. Her camera captured broken windows, warped shingles, and an overwhelming silence. No birds, no wind, not even the crunch of her footsteps. Just static from inside the homes. In the first house, she discovered the numbers carved into the underside of a child's desk. 327.48.11. In the second house, the same digits had been scratched repeatedly into the back of a mirror. In the third, she found a photograph, black and white, dated 1971. In the image, 7 people, 3 men, 2 women, 2 children, standing outside house number 12, all smiling, all mid-wave. At first, nothing looked off, until she noticed each of their shadows fell in the wrong direction, and their eyes were crossed out with thin etched lines, done post-development. On the back of the photo, written in ink, were the words, "Don't answer it. Not again." The radio in the room was on, emitting high-frequency distortion. But when she turned the dial to 327.48, a voice came through. A woman, quiet, breathless. "Why did you come back?" Maple recorded every frequency she could isolate. Each one matched the codes left behind in the houses. Over time, a pattern emerged. The first 3 digits always read 327. The next set increased sequentially, 0.44, 0.45, 0.46. The final 2 numbers reset every 7 codes. She brought in a former NSA cryptanalyst to assist. His conclusion? It was a countdown, a loop, not tracking time, but location. Each full set aligned with a GPS timestamp from the days preceding a known disappearance tied to the Echo Pines region. The signals weren't random. They were instructions. Miss Maple tuned one of the radios to the code etched into the floor of house number 8. The audio that played was clearer this time. Male voice, "We see you. 327.49.02. 2 remain." Then the gate opens. Moments later, the camera Maple was using began malfunctioning, flickering, skipping frames. Her field mic picked up unexplained breathing noises, although she was alone. She moved to house number 12, the origin of the photo. The front door was ajar. Inside on the wall, in chalky red strokes, was one final sequence, 327.50.01. The living room was otherwise empty, except for a dusty radio. As Maple turned the dial, the audio cut in mid-sentence. Final address received. Code 327.50.01. Location 112 Candlewood Drive. She froze. That was her address. A location that had never been entered into the radio. She was being tracked, not by a person, but by the signal. Miss Maple returned home that night and disconnected every device capable of receiving signals. Phones, Wi-Fi, even the wiring to her smoke detectors. But at 3:27 a.m., her portable emergency radio, powered off and battery removed, lit up. The screen flickered, then displayed 3 lines. Signal received. You are known. Next code begins. Authorities swept Echo Pines days later. All the houses were sealed off. Hazmat teams declared the location contaminated with unknown electromagnetic interference. But what wasn't reported was what they found in the storm drain beneath house number 3. A pile of analog radios, stacked in a circle, and at the center, a mannequin, wearing a coat Miss Maple recognized as belonging to the missing filmmaker. Its eyes were covered with wire, its mouth sewn shut, but inside the mannequin's chest cavity was a handwritten note. Don't decode it. Every signal unlocks another door. If you found a radio playing static in an abandoned town, would you turn the dial? If it spoke to you directly, using your name, would you listen? If the numbers written in blood pointed to your house, would you leave? Or would you try to understand what they wanted? Comment below. If your radio turns on by itself tonight, don't tune it. Just let it hiss. Case number 5, the VHS tapes. The boy in the footage blinks exactly 4 times, then looks at the camera and says, "I don't want to do this again." 24 hours later, he was dead, exactly the way the tape showed. Same clothes, same room, same clock. But here's the part no one can explain. The tape was postmarked the day before it was recorded. The year was 1983. The town was East Darrington, Pennsylvania. Jonathan Krell was 12 years old when he received the first tape, unmarked, no return address. His mother thought it was blank until they played it. What they saw was Jonathan, on their couch, wearing the same pajamas he had on that morning, reading a comic book. Then the boy on the screen looked up and said, "Mom, don't answer phone." Seconds later, the phone rang in real life. It was his father calling from work. From that day forward, one tape arrived every morning for 12 days. Each one predicted Jonathan's actions with eerie precision, what he'd eat, where he'd go, who he'd talk to, and always the tape ended with static. On the 12th day, the tape ended differently. In the final recording, Jonathan is seen sleeping. The camera slowly zooms in. At the 38-minute mark, his eyes open wide. He says, "I know now. It's behind the light." Then the screen goes dark. When his parents woke up the next morning, Jonathan was gone. His bed looked undisturbed. His window was locked. But on the floor beside his nightstand was a 13th tape. It was blank. Local authorities launched an investigation. The tapes were confiscated. FBI agents took over case. No signs of forced entry. No signs of abduction. What puzzled investigators most wasn't the content. It was the physical nature of the tapes. Lab analysis revealed they were recorded on magnetic film manufactured in 1992. 9 years in the future. The Krell family moved away. The house was sold. The case went cold. The tapes disappeared, classified under federal review. Until now. In 2023, Miss Maple received a package with no return label. Inside, a dusty VHS cassette. A typed note, "This one's yours." The tape was labeled MM number 001. Miss Maple had no working VHS player. She tracked one down from a local pawn shop. The shopkeeper said it came from an estate sale, the Krell home. She inserted the tape. Static, then black, then her. The screen showed Maple seated at her own desk, reading an old case file. The same sweater, same lamp, same pen. Everything matched her current reality. At 4 minutes, the video version of her looked directly into the lens and whispered, "Stop watching." At 6 minutes, the screen cut to a different location. A basement she didn't recognize. VHS shelves. Static on multiple TVs. And something moving in the far corner, barely visible. It wasn't human. Maple reviewed the footage frame by frame. In a single frame, undetectable at regular speed, was a face. Blurred, elongated, asymmetrical, and yet unmistakably her own. She enhanced the image. Her facial structure mirrored exactly, except the eyes were pitch black. No pupils, no irises, and its mouth sealed with tape. Miss Maple traced the basement layout to a home once owned by a video archivist named Harold Dresch, who vanished in 1987. His home? Located less than a mile from the original Krell residence. Miss Maple went to investigate. The basement had been sealed. She broke through. Inside were dozens of shelves lined with unmarked tapes, each labeled with initials. One read JK 1983, another AW 2001. The last one she pulled, MM 2023. It was still warm. Authorities were called in. The home was secured. Inside a locked cabinet, hidden behind a false wall, they discovered projector system, one built from custom analog tech. It wasn't meant to record. It was designed to predict. It used a mix of biosignal mapping and analog encoding, technology that shouldn't have existed in the 80s. One forensic analyst made a disturbing discovery. The magnetic strips of each tape carried residual thermal signatures, meaning the tapes weren't just made, they were watched. The timestamp of when Maple played her tape, already marked on the cassette, 2 days before she ever received it. That same night, Maple's backup camera, a digital device not connected to anything, turned itself on and recorded for 6 hours. When she reviewed the footage, it showed her sleeping. Nothing unusual, until the final 10 seconds. The Maple in the bed blinks, but the camera timecode freezes, and the audio picks up something whispering in reverse. Play it again. Miss Maple has since moved locations. She stored the tapes in an isolated facility, lead-lined off-grid, but one tape keeps reappearing. No matter where it's stored, it shows back up at her desk. And each time the ending is different. The last frame now shows her not watching but screaming. If someone mailed you a VHS tape predicting your future, would you watch it? If it showed you dying, would you try to change the ending? Or would you keep watching, hoping the next version ends differently? Comment below. And if a tape ever shows up on your doorstep with no label, don't press play. Or do. It's already recorded. Case number 6, the whistle of Black Hollow Lake. The sound wasn't loud. Just a single high-pitched note, like someone whistling from far away. It lasted exactly 6 seconds. Then the boy collapsed. When he woke up, 3 hours had passed. His shoes were wet. His pockets were filled with sand. But he was nowhere near the lake. And when his parents asked what happened, he said, "The woman in the water told me to wait." Black Hollow Lake sits deep in the forested region of Wyeth County, Oregon. It doesn't appear on modern maps. It was drained and sealed in 1957 after multiple drowning incidents. But the locals know you don't go near that water, not after sundown. Hikers report losing track of time. GPS fails within minutes of entering the tree line. Dogs refuse to approach the shoreline. And for decades, those who live nearby say they hear the same thing, a whistle, always the same pitch, always at night, and always followed by silence. When Miss Maple was called in, 3 children from neighboring towns had recently been found wandering nearby roads barefoot, unable to speak, each one clutching a stone covered in markings no one could read. The earliest documented tragedy occurred in 1913. A group of missionaries vanished while constructing a lakeside chapel. No bodies were recovered. Their tools and belongings were found floating near the dock. Their journals, preserved in a local archive, referenced strange fog banks, voices from beneath the surface, and an unseen presence that disrupted their prayers. But those reports were dismissed until the disappearances started again. In 1961, Park Ranger Dale Whitaker described finding circular indentations in the mud near the water's edge, perfectly symmetrical, about the size of a human head. They weren't footprints. They weren't animal tracks. They were impressions. Each one had a single sharp hole in the center, as if something had been pushed through. No samples were ever taken. The evidence vanished. By 1980, the lake had been fenced off and declared a restricted zone. That didn't stop the whistling. Reports from nearby towns increased. People waking up covered in algae, children drawing symbols they couldn't explain, fishermen hearing hymns from underwater. That's when Miss Maple stepped in. Armed with thermal scanners, sonar equipment, and a team of divers, she set out to explore what lay beneath Black Hollow Lake. What she found had been waiting for a very, very long time. The dive began at 7:02 a.m. Conditions were calm. Visibility limited. The lake's bottom was deeper than expected, much deeper. At 74 feet, the divers made contact with something metallic, then something stone. Cameras confirmed it was the steeple of a sunken building, a chapel, but the architecture wasn't consistent with the 1900s. It was older, cruder, as if it had been built by hand and buried on purpose. Miss Maple and her team descended further. Inside the chapel were wooden benches, broken glass, and an altar facing downward, designed not for a congregation, but for something below the floor. On the walls were carvings, symbols resembling both musical notes and astrological charts. A large wooden organ had been rotted through, but one pipe remained intact. When one of the divers brushed against it, the high-pitched whistle echoed through the comms. That's when the feed began cutting. Static, shifts in pressure, then movement. The camera panned slowly, nothing but darkness, silk clouds, and bubbles, until a figure appeared, floating, arms outstretched, wear what looked like an antique robe. The figure's head turned, and the mask it wore reflected light. A face carved from wood, no eyes, just 2 holes drilled clean through. It reached out. The feed cut. The diver was pulled upward, panicking, convulsing. When they surfaced, they didn't speak for 6 days. When they finally did, they said only one thing: she's still listening. All recorded footage in the dive was transferred to an isolated drive, but audio continued to play from the disabled comms unit for 12 minutes after the team resurfaced. The sound wasn't static. It was layered, chanting, weeping, a child humming something close to a lullaby, then a single voice. We asked them to come. We did not ask them to leave. After the incident, Maple cross-referenced the chapel's architecture with historical archives from a nearby indigenous tribe. According to local legend, the area that became Black Hollow Lake was once a sacred site, a convergence point, a place where sound could summon memory or erase it. Those who trespassed and listened to the wrong tones would forget who they were. Some would never return. Others came back, changed. One photograph recovered from a nearby trail cam shows a man kneeling at the lake's edge, hands submerged, unmoving, for 3 hours. When rangers approached, he didn't respond. When asked why he did it, he said, "She wanted me to remember." His shoes were filled with sand, and his pupils never dilated again. Would you follow a whistle no one else hears? If a lake started calling your name in your dreams, would you answer? And if a chapel sank into the dark and never stopped singing, would you go down to listen? Comment below. And if you wake up wet tomorrow with sand in your pockets, don't go outside. She's waiting for you to come back. Case number 7, the Puppet House Murders. She was found sitting upright at her dining table. Eyes open, mouth slightly parted, hands clasped neatly on her lap. The knife wound was clean. No signs of struggle. But what caught investigators off guard wasn't the body. It was the puppet, sitting across from her. Same pose, same clothes, same expression, made from wood, thread, and something else, something human. April 1999, Cedar Hollow, Missouri. Local resident Bernice Holloway is found dead in her home. No forced entry. No signs of theft. Just a single note pinned to the wall with a wooden needle. We only copy. Investigators are puzzled. The crime scene feels staged. Across from Bernice sits a handcrafted marionette. Identical clothing, identical features. Handmade, detailed, too detailed. Tissue samples later reveal the puppet's hair is human. DNA confirmed it belonged to Bernice. The house had no cameras. The neighbors saw nothing. But within 2 months, 2 more murders follow. Same setup, same puppet, same note. That's when Miss Maple was called in. Miss Maple reviewed the evidence. All 3 puppets had jointed limbs carved from sycamore, not a popular wood. One of them had a faint engraving beneath its jaw. E.D. She traced it to an obscure local craftsman, Elijah Dandridge, a puppet maker active in the 1950s. Elijah's style was infamous in underground artisan circles. He specialized in lifelike motion, a technique he claimed was taught to him by his mother, who, according to town records, was committed to a sanatorium for delusional schizophrenia. His shop was closed in 1963 after a fire destroyed half the storefront. No body was ever recovered. Elijah was presumed dead, but his puppets survived. Maple located 3 in a collector's basement, behind lock and key. Each one posed unnaturally. One was holding its own hand. Another was staring upward, mouth open in mid-scream. The third had no strings attached, yet its arms were outstretched, as if reaching. None of them had eyes. The sockets were hollow. Maple asked the collector where he'd obtained them. He said a man in a wool coat left them on his porch in 1994, with a note, "Please keep them company." Maple returned to Cedar Hollow and reopened Elijah Dandridge's property files. The land he once owned had changed hands multiple times, but one thing remained: The basement was always sealed. Local children said it was haunted. Maple gained access. The door had 6 locks. Inside, shelves, rows and rows of glass jars filled with doll parts, buttons, hand-sewn clothing. And hanging in the center, a puppet dressed in a blue coat. One shoe missing. Its tag read, CH 2006. Maple's breath caught. That was a year in town of a missing girl, Charlotte Henley, last seen walking home from school. Her body was never found. Local police had written it off as an abduction, but the puppet's coat matched Charlotte's description. DNA tests confirmed it. Strands of her hair were sewn into the scalp of the puppet. Maple found a notebook tucked under a false drawer in the workbench. The pages were filled with sketches, labeled poses, expressions, string configurations. But one page stood out. It simply read, "Don't carve what you don't want to keep." Underneath was a list of names. Some crossed out, some circled. At the bottom, M. Maple unfinished. She flipped the page. A hand-drawn puppet with her face. Maple left Cedar Hollow that night. She contacted federal authorities. The house was raided. In the crawl space, they found a seal crate. Inside, 12 puppets, all dressed in modern clothing, each with an eerily lifelike smile. Fingerprints? None. Trace DNA? Present on every single puppet, all from people confirmed deceased, yet none had visible injuries. It was as if someone had watched them die and remembered every detail. 2 weeks after returning home, Miss Maple received a package. No return address. Inside, a single puppet. Female, curled red hair, wearing a dark green coat. At first glance, she didn't recognize it until she noticed the bracelet. It was hers. The puppet's arms were gently folded across its chest, and in its mouth, a note rolled tight. Now you understand. If you found a puppet in your home, dressed like you, posed like you, would you keep it? Would you hide it? Or would you destroy it? And hope it doesn't move when you turn away? Comment below. And if you hear the soft creak of string joints in the middle of the night, don't look behind you. They only move when you don't watch. Case number 8, the forest that moves. Her compass spun in her hand, even as she stood still. Her footsteps, carefully marked with red ribbon every 10 yards, vanished behind her one by one, replaced by branches that hadn't been there moments earlier. When she screamed, the echo didn't bounce back. It answered, and the forest shifted again. Blackroot Forest, a stretch of land in the Pacific Northwest so dense, so overgrown, and so deeply undocumented, most maps don't bother including it. But the locals know it by name. And more importantly, they know what not to do. Don't enter without a guide. Don't stay after dark. Don't follow the sounds that shouldn't be there. For over 50 years, hikers, campers, and researchers have gone missing in Blackroot. Sometimes for hours, sometimes forever. Those who return often speak the same words. I walked in circles. The trees were watching. I came back, but I don't feel like I ever left. In the spring of 2022, Miss Maple received a file from the Wyeth County Sheriff's Department. Inside, 3 missing person reports. A drone's last footage showing a clearing that, upon investigation, no longer existed. A handwritten note left behind by a forest ranger named Douglas Kern. The note read, "I was standing on flat land, then I blinked, and I was downhill. The trees breathe, not like lungs, like they think." Intrigued, Maple set out to investigate. She brought ribbon markers, GPS, satellite relays, an audio log recorder, and a wide-lens body cam. The plan was simple. Mark every tree she passed, check the GPS every 10 minutes, and leave breadcrumbs both digital and physical. The first hour was uneventful. Birdsong, breeze, perfect light through the canopy. Then a change. The wind stopped. The insects went quiet, and the light, though it was still early afternoon, dimmed unnaturally. Her GPS pinged. Weak signal. 10 steps later, it read, "Reacquiring location." The trees began to close in. Miss Maple began laying ribbon markers every 20 feet. Bright red cloth tied tight to bark. She placed reflective tape on some for good measure, but within minutes, they were gone. Not torn, not fallen, gone. She turned back toward her entry point using a compass. North, then west, then the needle spun. She checked the GPS again. This time, the screen flashed coordinates from over 40 miles east. Impossible. Her audio recorder picked up something faint. A rustling, then a soft voice, barely above a whisper. It said wrong path. Then silence. Maple continued forward, hoping to reach the marked tree where her drone's final footage had ended. She found it, or what she thought was it. The tree was the right shape. The bark matched. But etched into it, fresh, deep, and unmistakably human, was the word, leave. Her body cam footage began glitching. The time code reversed for 10 seconds. And during that reversal, a frame appeared. Maple, standing, still, but behind her, a figure. Human-shaped, too tall, no face, just bark where skin should be. And its fingers, branches, moving. She spun. Nothing there. But her next 3 markers were gone. And ahead, between the trees, was a clearing. A single wooden post stood at its center. Tied to it was one of her red ribbons, one she hadn't placed yet. 3 hours after she entered Blackroot, Maple stumbled out. Her boots were soaked, her voice hoarse from yelling, her compass shattered, and her markers still in her bag. All of them. But she remembered placing at least 2 dozen. The footage from her body cam was intact. The time code showed no breaks. But the path she walked, reconstructed via GPS overlay, wasn't circular. It was a spiral, inward, leading to a single point that didn't exist on any map. That point pulsed with electronic interference. Every time she tried to play footage from that section, the screen turned black. The only sound? Leaves rustling, then a branch snapping, then her own voice. Who's there? Silence. Then a reply, distorted but human. You're already home. If you marked your path and turned around, and those markers were gone, would you keep walking, or would you wait, hoping the trees stop moving? And what if the person who finds you isn't wearing the right badge? Would you follow them out, or ask one question first? What's your name? Because the last time Miss Maple checked her camera, she watched herself leading someone out of the forest, but she never went back in. Case number 9, the eyes in the paintings. She stood alone in the gallery. No one behind her. No reflections in the glass. And yet, every time she stepped away from the portrait, she felt it, the pressure behind her eyes, the weight of being observed. Then on the footage, her pupils dilate, her hands tremble, and in the background, the painting's subject blinks. In the quiet halls of the Merriwick Museum, Room 4 has remained off-limits for the past 11 months. The room once housed an exhibit known as the Widow's Gaze, a collection of portraits donated by the estate of Alara Greaves, a reclusive artist whose work never left her own home during her lifetime. The exhibit opened with little fanfare, but it closed with a trail of unanswered questions, because 6 patrons who viewed the Widow's Gaze on its opening day were never seen again. Their vehicles remained in the parking lot. Surveillance showed them entering, but no exit footage exists. The only commonality? All 6 paused, facing the same portrait, at the exact same timestamp. Miss Maple was granted private access to the sealed Room 4. The first thing she noticed was the absence of mirrors. Every reflective surface had been removed. The second was the silence. Unlike the rest of the museum, the temperature in Room 4 was markedly lower, despite no recorded HVAC discrepancies. At the center of the room hung the Widow's Gaze, a portrait of a seated woman in a mourning dress, head slightly turned, hands folded, and eyes, painted in immaculate detail, locked just above the viewer's own. Subtle, unsettling. It wasn't just that the eyes followed you. It was that they seemed to look ahead, to where you would be. Maple installed time-lapse cameras and used infrared scans. What she found changed the entire investigation. The pigment in the portrait's eyes reflected differently depending on the angle of the observer, and under infrared light, The painting beneath the paint emerged. A second image, faded but visible, not of the widow, but of a missing woman, one of the 6. Further scans revealed that each portrait in the collection housed a shadow image, a ghost painting beneath the surface. 6 portraits, 6 missing people, all buried beneath the image of the widow. But how? Paint analysis confirmed the top layer was decades old. The inner layers? More recent. Impossible, unless the paintings had been altered after the museum received them. That's when Maple requested to view the artist's file. Elara Greaves, born 1923, died 2005, declared legally blind at the age of 31. But her later works, painted after her diagnosis, were her most detailed. Retinal-level precision in the eyes, skin textures mimicking human pores, even fingerprints embedded into brushstrokes. Medical records confirmed the blindness, but a private letter, recovered from her estate, written in shaky cursive, read, "They stare through me now. I only guide the brush." Beneath the letter was a sketch of Room 4, long before the museum existed, long before the gallery was built, the exact layout, drawn from above, a note written in the margins. They liked to watch where they used to be. Then came the surveillance audit. Miss Maple requested all footage from Room 4. One frame, 5:42 p.m., opening night, showed the 6th missing woman stepping forward. As she approaches the canvas, a flicker, the eyes move, not an animation. In reality, one blink, then the woman drops her bag. Then, static. The next frame is empty. Maple instructed a second analysis using LiDAR texture scanning. Results showed the canvas had dimensional irregularities, meaning the surface wasn't flat. The canvas held ridges, minute curved, matching the contours of human faces. When mapped in 3D, they aligned with missing person files. The paint, it seems, had been applied over something more than canvas. The final scan revealed something Maple had missed. The widow's left hand, originally painted clenched, was now open, her palm pointing directly at Maple's camera. Inside the open palm, under fresh layers of varnish, a faint red signature. M. Maple. A week later, she received an envelope at her office. Inside, a miniature canvas. No address, no sender. The image? Her own eye, painted perfectly, staring just above the viewer's line of sight. If a painting watched you back, subtly, silently, would you keep looking? Or would you turn away, knowing the moment you blink, something shifts? If someone handed you a brush and said, "Just copy what you see," would you ask what was first? Comment below. And if tonight you find a picture on your wall you don't remember hanging, don't look at the eyes. They're already looking at you. The final code. The files don't match. Case locations years apart, continents apart. But zoom in, closer, overlay the dates, align the numbers, cross-reference the names. There's a pattern, not a person, not a motive, something else. Something that only exists because we keep asking questions. Miss Maple had reached the end of her investigation, or what she believed was the end. 10 cold cases, 10 strange, impossible threads. But when she laid them all out, red string on the caseboard, newspaper clippings, audio logs, photos, something emerged. A shape, a repeated symbol. Hidden in basement graffiti, sewn into puppet fabric, reflected in Blackwood's glitch footage, painted into the widow's shadow image. A symbol that shouldn't exist. One she hadn't noticed until it started showing up in her own notes. She ran a frequency analysis on the audio from the tapes, from the lake, from the radio signals in echo pines. Every single file contained a hidden layer, low hertz, not audible to the human ear. When visualized, they formed something like handwriting, the same symbol, again and again. Then she checked time codes. 3:07 a.m., the moment the clocks froze in the missing room. For 16, the time stamp before the girl vanished in the mirror incident. 5:42, the blink in the widow's gaze. Add them, 13:05, or, when inverted, 5:03:1. 5031. The case number on a box she had never opened in her archive room. The box she never remembered filing. She opened it. Inside, newspaper clippings, photos of herself, a list of names, people she hadn't met yet, and a hand-drawn map. A map that, when overlaid onto the case locations, connected them, not like a web, like a circuit. Maple consulted a systems theorist. The man thought it was a game, an ARG, until she showed him the raw footage, the blinking, the voices, the whispers that called her name, buried in spectrograms, until he mapped the pattern's activation points. They pulsed, like electrical currents, each case a trigger, each solved mystery a power source. The more attention it got, the clearer it became. It was feeding on curiosity, on fear, on the human urge to explain the unexplainable. Miss Maple wasn't closing cases. She was unlocking them. And something was watching through the cracks. Not a person, not a spirit, but an echo, a presence that exists only inside unanswered questions. Each time we look deeper, it grows clearer. Every glitch, every anomaly, every disappearance. They aren't random. They're invitations to investigate, to document, to film, to share. And that's how it spreads. She tried to stop, took down the caseboard, burned her notes, deleted her footage, but the views kept climbing. Clips re-uploaded by anonymous accounts. Her voice echoing on videos she never made. And then her name appeared in the margin of a painting she had never seen, in a file she never touched, in a case dated 2 years into the future. Footage from a body cam shows her investigating a case she doesn't remember. And behind her, caught in one frame, a board with photos, your face, your screen, watching. So now the question is yours. Should Miss Maple keep going? Or stop? Should you keep watching or turn away? If this is just a story, tell yourself it ends here. But if you notice something strange, anything, a frame that fell off, a voice that echoed wrong, a name that sounded familiar, comment below. But remember, the more you try to explain it, the louder it gets. And now, here we are. You've followed every case. You've traced every thread. You saw the missing room. You heard the playground whisper. You felt the mirror stare back. Maybe you paused. Maybe you turned the volume down. Maybe you leaned closer, even when you didn't mean to. That's how it begins. That's how it always begins. They weren't just stories. They were coordinates, markers, and you were part of them from the start. You've seen the signs, the timestamps that repeat, the faces that never quite match their names, the footage that plays backward when you blink, the voice that doesn't belong to anyone in the room. So now ask yourself, quietly, why are you still watching? There is something inside these stories. Not a person, not a ghost. Something made of silence, of pauses, of curiosity. It lives in that itch when you can't stop looking, when something doesn't add up, and you replay the clip again and again until you're not sure what you're watching anymore. We call her Miss Maple, but she was never alone. You were here the whole time, because every time you watched, it grew. Every time you asked a question, it answered just out of frame. Did you notice the numbers? Did you freeze the frame? Did you catch your own reflection in the glass? That wasn't an accident. The cases weren't random. They were paths. They were invitations. One by one, you walked them, and whether you believe it or not, something walked behind you. Tape slows for 1 second, then resumes. Ambient heartbeat fades in subtly. So what happens now? You've crossed a timeline. From viewer to participant. Don't you remember? You saw a name you recognized. You heard your town on the tape. You thought it was coincidence. It wasn't. Some mysteries are meant to stay buried, but others are waiting for you. So now it's your turn. Look at the board again. Remember each case. Which one disturbed you the most? Was it the puppet with your smile? The child whispering under the swing? The painting that blinked only once, and it was enough? Comment below. Tell us why. Share what you saw, even if no one believes you. Especially if no one believes you. Want to help Miss Maple solve more cases? Then subscribe, like this video. Ring the bell before it rings on its own. But be careful, because if she comes back, it's because you called her. Check your mirrors tonight. And if something's missing, a detail that wasn't there this morning, a reflection that doesn't blink when you do, a whisper that ends with your name, don't panic. Just watch the next episode before it watches you. We'll see you again, whether you mean to come back or not.